Hi everyone, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to spend the next 10 to 15 minutes or so orienting us to networks improvement communities referred to as NICs. And the idea is that this will provide a foundation for Marshall's subsequent presentation and also our conversation about the Iowa NIC specifically. Next slide. Many of you may already know what a networks improvement community is, or at least you've heard the term. NICs are not at all a new idea. They originated in the fields of industrial organization and healthcare, but only recently have they emerged in education. Over the past 3 to 5 years, they've gained a lot of traction. We've seen a lot of new NICs merging across the country to address a range of problems of practice in education. Next slide. NICs have been seen as a solution to what some see as the limitation of traditional approaches to research, such as randomized controlled trials. So these approaches tend to focus on whether or not an intervention works. They often provide little information about why the intervention might work or for whom. So NICs are different because they test interventions across varied contexts to determine what works, when, for whom, and under what sets of circumstances. So in doing so, NICs provide information about interventions that's much more useful to practitioners who are considering implementing a particular intervention in their context. Next slide. NICs comprise groups of individuals, such as teachers, or organizations, which could be schools, school districts, or pretty much any other kind of organization you could think of, intermediate school districts, for example. They're all working together to address a common problem of practice. And this work is coordinated by an organization that's referred to as the hub. So to give an example, the NIC may comprise several school districts, say, working together to improve student achievement. And the work of these districts could be coordinated by an organization like REL Midwest. And this is the case with the Iowa NIC that we're going to delve a little bit more deeply into in a little bit. Next slide. So according to Tony Brake and colleagues in the book Learning to Improve, which is really a foundational text for this work, NICs have 4 defining features. I'm going to go through each of these so we can really get a good sense of what this is all about. And the first defining feature is that they're focused on a well-specified aim. Associates in process improvement identify 3 improvement questions that guide the work of the NIC. And the first question is, what specifically are we trying to accomplish? By answering this question, participants set an aim to guide their work. What's really important about this is that the aim is specific and measurable. So an example to make this concrete. If the focus of the NIC is on improving literacy, an aim that's specific and measurable might be by 2020, the percent of 3rd graders reading at grade level will increase from 60% to 80%. So this aim provides a time frame by 2020. It suggests a target population, 3rd graders. And in addition, it specifies a measurable target for improvement by providing very specific numbers for the expected increase, 60% to 80%. Next slide. So the second defining feature of a NIC is that it's guided by a deep understanding of the problem. Next slide. Albert Einstein famously said, if I only had 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and only 5 minutes finding the solution. And indeed, this is the case in NICs that we need to spend a lot of time up front understanding the problem, or we can't find a solution. So some questions that NIC participants may ask themselves to identify and define the problem are, what problem of practice should be addressed? How do you know it's a problem? What current efforts are in place to address the problem? How might a NIC propel these efforts, supporting ongoing work, but not adding to it? Next slide. One way to better understand the problem is by conducting a root cause analysis. This is also sometimes referred to as a causal systems analysis. But what it does is it focuses participants on answering why questions. Specifically, why does this problem occur? Participants keep asking why until they have a deep understanding of the factors that contribute to the problem. One way sometimes you may see a root cause analysis carried out is using a fishbone diagram, and that's just a tool to help enumerate the different contributing factors to a problem. Next slide. The third defining feature of NICs is that they're disciplined by the rigor of improvement science, which is a method instead of tools for solving a specific problem. So what this method involves is repeated mini experiments in which interventions are tested through some kind of continuous improvement process. Here we're going to talk about plan, do, study, act cycles. You may have heard variations on this. I've heard often in schools, I've heard teachers or school leaders talk about plan, do, check, act cycles or plan, do, review cycles. Regardless of what you call it or the specific type of continuous improvement process, what's really important is that the users of the intervention are fully engaged in the testing process. In contrast to traditional approaches to research in which the external researchers are the ones who are responsible for carrying out the evaluation. Next slide. So the first phase of the PDSA cycle is plan. And this is often the most involved stage. During plan, participants develop the foundation for the work of the NIC. They begin by identifying an intervention or change in practice that addresses one or more root causes of the problem. Earlier, I had mentioned about the 3 core improvement questions. The second improvement question is, what change might we introduce and why? So here's where the change comes in. And it doesn't have to be a radical change. It can simply be a small shift in practice. Often when we hear the word intervention, we think about a large-scale program. And that doesn't have to be the case. It can be, like I said, just a shift in practice, a change in the classroom routine, for example. But what's most important is that the change in practice directly addresses the root causes underlying the problem, and it's motivated by a theory about why the intervention might work. After identifying the intervention, participants make predictions about what they expect will happen, and they develop a plan for monitoring progress. So you don't know a change is actually an improvement unless you're monitoring progress, and that brings us to the third and final improvement question is, how will we know that change is an actual improvement? Measures of improvement should be tied to the theory of improvement developed earlier, and importantly, they should be practical. So you may have heard the term practical measures, and what that means is that they're part of regular routines in the classroom, say, or in schools, and they're not a burden to implement. Sometimes short surveys like exit tickets in the classroom work really well. Then the final step at this stage is to be as deliberate and specific as possible in planning for the implementation of the intervention. Participants should develop a detailed implementation plan, considering who will be involved, the specific roles of those involved, how often the group will meet to discuss the intervention, and the projected timeline. Next slide. So now is the time to implement the intervention, the fun part. And throughout implementation, participants are collecting data to monitor improvement using the practical measures developed during the plan phase. Next slide. After implementing the intervention for a specified period, and usually not too long, sometimes 4 to 6 weeks or potentially shorter, participants in the NIC come back together to analyze data and interpret findings. Typically, the network hub, which we talked about earlier, is the organization that is coordinating this work, provides easy to understand data visualizations, and participants review the visualizations, discuss their observations, ask questions, and determine next steps for the intervention. Next slide. So the final phase in Plan, Do, Study, Act is Act. And it's at this point that participants decide how to proceed with the intervention using their data analysis for guidance. Examples of what participants may choose to do is adapt the intervention further, adopt it. They may abandon it completely and say, this did not work, we're going to go in a completely different direction. Or they may expand it. Say you're working with third graders on literacy. In our previous example, they may expand the intervention to fourth graders. Maybe it looks slightly different, but there's a larger group of students in the target audience. Or maybe there's one school in the district working on a problem and they decide to expand the same intervention to other schools in the district. Next slide. And then the process is repeated. Each PDSA cycle builds on the prior cycle, providing participants with the opportunity to continuously refine their intervention until they achieve the initial aim. Next slide. Okay, the final defining feature of a NIC, and this is what distinguishes it from other improvement processes. So it's not just improvement science, but it's improvement science carried out within a network. It's coordinated to accelerate the testing of interventions across varied contexts. I mentioned earlier that NICs are groups of individuals or organizations working on a common problem of practice. So by working together, engaging in PDSA cycles and testing similar kinds of interventions to address the same problem of practice, participants are able to learn from one another about what works in different contexts. Next slide. And the way individuals and organizations learn from one another's experiences is through frequent NIC meetings in which participants come together, they compare results from PDSA cycles, and over time they begin to share their successes and failures, not just within the network, but to a broader group of colleagues outside the network. So that's an overview of NICs. Now I'm going to turn the presentation back to Marshall, who will contextualize these ideas by drawing on the specific experiences of the Iowa NIC.